So the directive, two directives were issued by the fire.
Just one.
Well, one by the Fire and Police Commission, and in the context of where you view it, where it's at presently in terms of its enforcement, in terms of its compliance, and where you believe it's at, and then we'll hear from City Attorney and Police Department.
Okay. I believe the directive was legally issued. It directs the chief to, as the subject matter expert in the field of law enforcement, to evaluate additional pursuable events. So if we hear that there's concern about the legality of drafting those kinds of SOPs, that really would be after the chief drafts it. I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not, but so I believe we are with a legal directive. I've heard that the chief wants to have an extension. We have, Steve DeVogus and I have both said that's fine, but we haven't gotten a formal request for that yet.
And your date for compliance, or at least the time for implementation, was scheduled for when?
Well, the time for coming forward with some language to look at was this Thursday.
This Thursday, okay. So publicly, this is the first time you've communicated to the chief that an extension is possible?
Well, Chairman DeVogus communicated it with the mayor's office, and I've communicated that with the city attorney's office.
Okay. And how long extension, you don't even know how long extension was requested at this point in time?
We don't.
Okay. Would you like to make some comments, Chairman of the Fire and Police Commission?
I think the executive director carried out everything. I just want to echo that we believe that the directive was lawful and within the authority of the Fire and Police Commission to do so. And without a formal request for an extension, I'm assuming that we're going to get something in writing from the Chief's Department by Thursday.
Okay. City Attorney?
The mayor's office asked us to look at this directive last week. We have had an opportunity to briefly look at the directive. First of all, I agree that the commission has the authority to issue a directive such as this. We have some questions about the directive. I have not had an opportunity to address those questions to the chair or to the executive director of the commission. I will do that. I've also had some brief discussions with the chief. It's my understanding that he intends to file something with the commission on Thursday. I don't know if he will be requesting additional time, but from my perspective, I want to satisfy answers to some questions that we have regarding the directive, and we'll work together to get those questions answered.
Representative from the Police Department.
Good morning, Leslie Saletti, Milwaukee Police Department, Office of Management Analysis and Planning. In my role, I manage the Office of Management Analysis and Planning, and we're formally charged in creating and maintaining all the standard operating procedures for the Milwaukee Police Department. I'm here to speak to the matter of the development of the recent Fire and Police Commission directives issued and our role in that. The directive that was issued, if you have any questions about that.
Does Chief plan on asking for an extension on Thursday?
I would direct that to the Chief of Police. I'm only here to speak to that item, as that's what I was prepared to discuss.
Question, Mr. Chair.
Alderman Baumann.
To the Police Department representative, does the chief agree that the Fire and Police Commission has the legal authority to do what they did, or disagree?
Again, I would direct that to the Chief of Police, as I was prepared to speak on this
Is anybody
matter.
representing him?
Well, as the matter was noticed and discussed with me, it was to discuss the development of the directive, and that's what I came prepared to discuss as I manage that area of the police department.
As the city attorney had a conversation with the chief of police, does he agree or disagree that the commission has the authority to do what they did?
I could only tell you that he intends to respond to the directive on Thursday. I have not seen the response, although I've offered to review it with him if he would like us to do that. From my perspective, as I've indicated, we've issued opinions on this issue going back to 2001, 2002, 2003, and we are satisfied that the commission has the authority to issue a directive like this. Again, we do have some questions regarding the substance, but I think those are best resolved between the commission which issued it and the city attorney. We'll also, as I said, we've also offered to review whatever response the chief wants to provide to the commission. I do not know if he's going to ask for additional time beyond what he plans on providing on Thursday. But in terms of my issues, it may take us a little bit of time. We haven't scheduled anything yet to sit down and address some of the questions. I would prefer not to discuss them in public until we had a chance to talk to them with...
Hypothetically, say his response on Thursday is, I'm not going to do anything. I don't think you have the authority, and I am issuing no new standard operating procedure. What's our remedy? What's the Fire and Police Commission's remedy as the body who has, under state statute, the only control or has exercised the only accountability over the police department? In
one opinion that we issued back in early 2000, we indicated that the remedy is mandamus,
okay,
to force the chief to respond to the directive.
Okay.
Alderman Perez.
I'm just a little confused how this is either working or supposed to work, that whether it's the mayor or the city attorney is talking to both the mayor and the chief about a directive, and it seems like who is someone being represented here? I mean, it's all over the newspaper. The chief has a lawyer. You're asking questions on behalf of the directive because the mayor asked you to do that, to the Fire and Police Commission. It just seems like this is this the way this normally happens, or does the Fire and Police Commission have to have some counsel to speak to your counsel?
No, this is the way it normally happens. Generally, we follow our opinions. So typically in a situation like this, I would prefer to get a written request for an opinion on our view of the directive, but I think it's best that we talk about it first. But I don't represent the Fire and Police Commission. I don't represent the chief. I represent the city. But I have the opportunity to work with all of them to try to resolve issues such as this. A conflict arises when there is litigation. For example, if the chief's private lawyer decides he does not agree with the authority of the commission to issue the directive, a lawsuit might be brought on behalf of the chief. Under those circumstances, I would seek to represent the Fire and Police Commission. But generally, the representation issues don't occur until there's something like litigation. I can provide legal advice to the Common Council, to the mayor, to the Fire and Police Commission, to the chief of police. They may not like it, and they may seek other remedies because of my opinion, but the fact is, at least right now, we've had informal discussions about the directive, and I am prepared to work with the Fire and Police Commission and the chief to address any issues that I have, and it's not a question of representation.
Is there a representative here from the mayor's office? Okay. In your conversations with the mayor, is he giving you any direction about this directive?
I think generally it's what I outlined for you in terms of seeking to have some questions answered about the directive itself with the Fire and Police Commission, and to assist the chief, if necessary, in responding to the directive. So our bottom line is the directive, the Fire and Police Commission does have authority to issue a directive such as this.
But the mayor did not indicate that he planned on vetoing this?
No. Okay. I have no discussion about that at all.
Alderman Perez, do you have more questions?
So I just want to understand your role then. You've been asked that there's issues relating to the directive? There's concerns with it?
Yes, that question came from the mayor's office.
Legal ones?
Right. Ours is not to judge policy, whether it's good policy or bad policy. That's a matter between the Fire and Police Commission and the chief and the mayor, if appropriate. My job is to ensure that what is occurring is legal. My concern is we have to look, there is a state statute regarding high-speed pursuit that must be followed. We handled a case, the only major case on high-speed pursuit in the state, back in the 90s, went to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It provides us with some guidance with respect to what we need to do in high-speed pursuit policy, and we want to make sure that both the statute and the case law are being followed when a new SOP is developed.
Mr. Chair.
Before you get there, for the Fire and Police Commission, did you take that into consideration before their directive was issued, both the court case and state statute?
Yes.
Okay.
And
I'll-
the chair took that into consideration because it was his
Yes.
initiative.
Thank you, sir. All right.
Mr. Chair, I just have one follow-up since I have the
Yeah, of
floor.
course.
With that said, I mean, if the questions are legal, then shouldn't you receive a written request to kind of opinionate the legality of it then, instead of just offering informal advice, I guess?
Well, I would prefer that.
But you're doing it anyway.
I'm going to
Okay.
approach it the way I indicated, but I would prefer that somebody put questions in writing that we can answer, because as I said, the bottom line is we follow our opinions. That's why we issue public opinions. That's our view of the law, and if there is a challenge to the issue that we have opined on, we follow our opinion. It may be that under some circumstances, we say the Fire and Police Commission is absolutely correct. The chief disagrees. The Fire and Police Commission is sued, and we will seek to represent the Fire and Police Commission. I don't know what the outcome will be here. I think we can address the concerns that we have. And yes, I would prefer that we do it in writing.
Is there some case law or study that you're already looking at that,
Yes,
which is?
I would prefer, again, to discuss it with the Fire and Police Commission first. I don't want to publicly discuss concerns that we may have that generate litigation. I'm going to try to work it out with the Fire and Police Commission and, if appropriate, the chief.
I guess that would make sense to me if that's what they want, so maybe they can answer that.
I think that this is the conflict issue is something that we've been concerned about, especially in our last meeting with the immigration issue that came to a head. And I think I speak for some of my other board members when I say that since the chief has gotten his own counsel, we might need to have our own counsel independently, just because you don't want to put the city attorney in an awkward position where, you know, they have too many masters and you don't pick one. So that's a concern, a very valid concern I feel like the board has at this point, even though we understand this is how it's always been done, and you know, and we understand the representation issues that the city attorney has just brought up.
Sure. Well, I think you need some direction from the mayor, period. All right?
Or we need direction from since the chief is the one that has to draft it, maybe he's the one that should put forth the questions in writing, because we're just the ones that gave the directive. How he complies with that directive is totally up to the department.
But I mean, there is a remedy too. The mayor can veto it, right? And then we begin all over again. So a lot of this is seemingly a lack of communication, which is very frustrating, because everybody here technically, you know, works for the city of Milwaukee here, with exception perhaps of the board members of the Fire and Police Commission. So I would just say I'm very frustrated by the lack of coordination and communication on this whole process. But go ahead, Alderman Perez.
You've said you've spoken to the chief about this directive. Did you speak to his counsel about the directive?
No. No, my understanding is he retained that counsel solely because of the last paragraph in the directive, suggesting the possibility of discipline. And if discipline were to occur, that's not something where we could provide legal counsel. But from my perspective, at this time anyway, that's not on the table, because as I indicated, the chief intends to provide some type of response. I originally thought that there had not been a directive issued by the commission prior to this one. I am now aware of the fact that there was a directive issued back in 2003 to then Chief Jones, directing him to develop a plan regarding gun violence. And that same paragraph, I believe, was included at the end of that directive. So it's not necessarily surprising. It's not necessarily threatening in my judgment. But the chief decided that he would retain his own counsel on that issue.
I just want to be clear, you or your team haven't spoken to his counsel?
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
And I did inquire whether or not that council is going to be paid by the taxpayers of the city, and I was informed that it would not be.
That, the payment is the obligation of the chief.
Right. So, additional questions, Alderman Perez, Alderman Bukowski.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, that was my exact question, is that who is paying for the chief's counsel? And you're saying the chief is?
At this point, the chief is. If there's, in the past, for example, there are police officers who have been disciplined, who have been fired, who have been reinstated to their prior position, and under the law, we have reimbursed them for their attorney's fees. But generally, where there is discipline or where there are criminal charges against the police officer, we will not provide representation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so I think all the committee members have had an opportunity. Alderman Cogs, you have a question?
The questions, I guess, that I've had have pretty much have been asked.
Okay, Alderman Kovac?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up, especially in some things stated by the Fire and Police Commission, but questions really specifically for City Attorney Langley. I understand this is our normal procedure, and I understand that there are situations when the normal procedure can put you in a very awkward position, given that you're independently elected, you represent the city, but the city has a common council, it has a mayor.
Generally, I look to the common council and the mayor.
Right, but then there's also the police chief and the Fire and Police Commission.
All the departments,
So,
Public Works, I mean,
Right. So in theory, there could be conflicts between, I mean, that doesn't usually happen. Usually, well, there are conflicts, but we usually settle them amicably without the need to go to court or hire representation. I can't even think of another example where I would have even considered hiring a lawyer to deal with DPW or the library or you name it, right? But in this case, especially given the file we're going to hear next, File 8, where we're considering outside counsel in order to get a record released, From a perspective of a lawyer, are you able to, because when Bauman asked you the hypothetical question, what if the chief just outright refuses, doesn't ask for an extension, just says, I'm not going to follow this? You said, I wrote it down, under those circumstances, I would seek to represent the FPC. I infer from that under different circumstances, you might represent the chief against the FPC if you felt he was on the right side of the law? Do you have that choice?
in litigation,
Yeah, I mean, because you said, Bauman asked you a hypothetical, and you couched it by saying, under those circumstances, I would want to, are there circumstances when you wouldn't want to represent the FPC, if you felt they were out of bounds?
there could be. I assume under those circumstances, the Fire and Police Commission would ask authority for outside counsel, and it might very
If you
well,
refuse to represent them, you mean?
if we refuse to represent them, again, following our opinion. But it may very well be that I couldn't represent the chief either, that I would have a conflict such that it's necessary to retain outside counsel for both the chief and the commission.
So here's my hypothetical. Let's say this committee and the Finance Personnel Committee and the full council passes outside counsel on the open record claim. You've already decided to represent the chief in defending not releasing those records, or have you?
Let's wait till we get to that next file.
Well, I just want to know, my hypothetical is, are you going to be here for the next file?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So my hypothetical essentially is, let's imagine you decide to represent the chief on that and represent the FPC on the other matter. Is that an inherent conflict in that you're both supporting and opposing the same person or the same department in court? Is that something you can straddle?
We're talking about ethical obligations
Yes,
under the rules
that's my
of
question.
conduct for lawyers. And there is a provision in the introductory language of the rules that indicate that government lawyers representing different entities within the government can provide representation where if it were a private sector lawyer providing that same representation, there would be an ethical conflict. So
ethically, legally, you could do that straddle?
probably could.
Would you want, well, no, of course you wouldn't want to, but would you?
I don't know. I
You don't know yet.
don't know.
So let's do this. I think all of us are, the majority of the Common Council feel very strongly on supporting the Fire and Police Commission and their directive in terms of, we've asked, they listen to the community, they issued directive. It's an important issue, not just to council members, but citizens throughout the community. So there is a sense of urgency. So we'd like to have some sort of direction as to whether the order is going to be modified or complied with. So I would encourage all parties to take the opportune time to sit down in a room and talk to each other, do something remarkably different in government, and get in a room and communicate and find out what are their issues. If there's a direction from the city attorney that needs to modify based on state statutes along with court cases, fine. But then communicate that so the directive can be issued in a manner which can be complied with. And then secondarily, the chief will then need to certainly have his opinion, whether he agrees or disagrees. But, we do have to have proper chain of command. And I just strongly believe that, this is an opportunity where we as a city should put a better foot forward. I think right now it's a bit embarrassing to see what's going on. So I would appreciate all the parties here to simply sit down and communicate with each other to try and resolve this as quickly as possible. So thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one more
Yeah.
question. Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. You indicated that there is a state statute and case law on the issue of pursuit or high-speed chases, however you want to characterize it. Is the current policy less aggressive than what is permitted under state statute and the existing case law? In your judgment, and if you don't know, I'll ask the Fire and Police Commission people who presumably should know because that's their area of jurisdiction.
I think we're going to propose a minor modification regardless of what happens with this directive to the chief on the policy. But I think generally the policy is consistent with the statute.
Current policy.
Current policy. Could it be modified? Yes. Is that a good idea? That's a policy decision that the Fire and Police Commission and the chief have to make. All I can do is provide them with the legal guidance they need to ensure that they comply with the statute and with the case law.
Okay, you use the word, current policy is consistent. I guess that wasn't my question. Is current policy less aggressive than what would be permitted under state statute and current case law or not? Because if it is less aggressive, then clearly there's room for the Fire and Police Commission to order a ramp up in aggression, whether that is categories of vehicles that are stopped, type of categories of offenses that are subject to being pursued via a high-speed chase, whatever the case may be. That's the question. If, on the other hand, the current policy is at the ceiling of what is permissible, then then ordering a more aggressive policy puts us in legal jeopardy of liability from high-speed chases, correct?
I indicated at the beginning of my comments that I thought the directive was a valid directive. We do have questions about the directive. Can they make changes from the current policy and still meet the statute and the case law? The answer is yes.
Okay, fine. That's
So
good
thank
enough.
you, Alwyn. Go ahead.
Just one point of clarity. You said currently the chief's private attorney is his own expense, but then you gave an example with the officers. So I guess just for clarity's sake, is there any scenario under which the city could end up having to pay for the private attorney that the chief has now engaged?
Yes. If the Fire and Police Commission decides to discipline the chief, for example, terminating the chief, for failure to comply with the directive, and the chief challenges the termination, and he is successful, in all likelihood, we would pay his attorney's fees.
Thank you.
I think we do that pretty summarily with all the other officers who are criminally or civilly charged. We end up doing this. So there has to be some consistency. Alderman Perez?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second on behalf of myself and the constituents of the 12th District. I just wanted to commend the chair of the Fire and Police Commission, DeVogus, for your hard work. I know that your kind of credentials were challenged at another committee meeting, and I didn't think it was appropriate, and I just wanted to thank you for your service.
Thank you, Alderman.
And I reinforce that.
Thank you, Chair.